The room's filling up, but why don't we go ahead and get started? Because I have a feeling we're gonna have lots to share and updates. So Arthur is first and then Jill.
All right, well, I'll keep it really short. I'm still plugging away in the CAL FIRE project that I've talked about before, looking at vegetation trends and cycles at 4 sites in Napa, Sonoma, and Lake County, covering about 200 square miles, looking at, and they're all within zones that CAL FIRE would consider fire-prone areas that may be a threat to communities or ecosystems. So I've been working on that.
Arthur, do you want to tell everyone just really quickly what your project is again, since there's some new people?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, and I did this on a small scale at Bouverie, but I'm taking this idea and was lucky enough to get funding with Pepperwood to do a much larger scale project. We've been working on for about 2 years now, and basically what it is it's looking at it's using multiple data sets going back about 150 years. So looking at early surveys, the Wildland vegetation maps from Berkeley, if people are familiar with those, from the 1930s, and then a variety of other ones, including the Sonoma Veg map from 2013. So putting those together, and then also developing an expanded fire history that goes well before CAL FIRE, which before the 2017 fire, I mean, this is not to diss CAL FIRE, but their records go back to about 1945. So you could easily think that the 2017 fire occurred in a landscape that had only had 1 fire before. But actually looking at the records, newspapers and various things, some of those areas have burned 4 to 6 times in the last 150 years. So, so these are places where fire is definitely a recurring thing that happens. And then looking, so what this project is doing is partly looking at how does the landscape and how does the vegetation recover after fire. And there's also evidence at Bouverie that there's like a cycle where it'll burn and then it'll come back as shrubs, often mostly chamise, and be maybe 80% shrub for the first couple decades after a fire, and then the trees start coming in. So then by the time you get 4 or 5 decades after a fire, you have as much as 60 or 80% tree cover. And then it seems like at that point, then the next fire happens. So there seems to be this cycle in the landscape. So trying to quantify that somewhat, trying to understand that somewhat, and then and also bringing in, I interviewed Clint McKay up at Pepperwood, and I'm hopefully going to be talking to somebody up at the Middletown Rancheria, and so interviewing some indigenous elders about their practices, and had a really interesting conversation with Clint, which I'll just share one little tidbit. He said, when they used to burn, they would use the ridge tops as the fire breaks, and that the Doug firs, that's where the Doug firs were, was on the top of the ridges in the old days, not all over like they are now. So trying to bring those things together. So I'm integrating all this stuff, and I'll be sharing it next month.
Awesome. Yeah, we were just saying we're going to schedule a longer presentation from Arthur, either February or March meeting. So that's going to be really exciting. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Arthur. And Jill, are you there?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Jill Butler, representing Gualala River Watershed Council. They've been getting a lot of rain up there in their watershed. We had our meeting, monthly meeting Tuesday night, and folks up there have had about 40 inches of rain this water year. So that's going back to October 1st. And people that live in Gualala and Annapolis were happy their power was back on after 8 or 9 day outage up there. Made me feel better about only being out for 18 hours down here close to Sebastopol. We're wrapped up with monitoring for the year, and working with Jason on starting meetings for the Gualala River Coalition, and I saw things online, so he'll fill us in more about that, I'm sure. And that's it for us.
Okay, thanks, Jill. Robert and then Brianna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robert Aguero. I'm a senior environmental specialist and forester here with Permit Sonoma. It's been a while since I've been at one of these meetings. I apologize. Just life and work, as you all know, gets pretty busy. I don't really know what to update on. I've been working with one of our planners on updating our county's tree ordinance, and we're currently in an outreach and engagement phase right now, and also working with our team here on some FEMA funded grant projects in the planning phase for that, which some of you have been involved with. But yeah, mainly I work on permitting and environmental review for public projects, a lot of SQL work for veg management, fuel reduction projects, and private timberland conversions and other forestry projects that the county has some nexus with. So.
Great, thanks. And let us know how we can be engaging with the tree ordinance.
Yeah, I was I was just talking with my planner co-part Doug Bush, and I think we did something like a while ago with this group, and I don't know if it's too soon to get on the agenda for next month, but we'd love to do another workshop with this crew if possible, or we could do a standalone one as well within the next month or so. So maybe Adriana, you and I can touch base about that.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay. Next is Brianna and then Jason Wells.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brianna Boaz. I'm the Natural Resources Professor and Program Coordinator at Santa Rosa Junior College. It has been a while. I have had a conflicted schedule for this meeting time for 2 semesters in a row, but not this semester. So you'll get to spend more time with me. Updates at the JC. We've had a really successful growth with our wildfire resilience program. Thank you, PG&E, for all of that money. And we started with a fuel reduction crew of 6 paid student interns, and now we have 4 crews of over 30 interns. And they're starting to go out and spread their wings and work around the county. Thank you, Jason Mills, for hiring one of them. So the program has been really successful, and we're hoping to sustain that growth. And for this semester, I'm teaching the forest management class at the JC, and I would love to have a career panel for my students. So if anyone would be interested in participating in that, I can pay you with food or alcohol, but not actual money. I can also pay you with gratitude, and my students can pay you with gratitude as well. So if you're interested in that, sharing your career experience and your professional development in the field of forestry, whether you're a forester or adjacent forester, I'll put my email in the chat box. I would love for you to come out and meet my students.
Cool. All right. So good to see you. Glad this lines up with your schedule this semester. Sweet. And then, yeah, so Jason Wells, and then Jason Mills.
Howdy, Jason Wells with Sonoma RCD. I'm trying to put together a map right now for we have a meeting this weekend for the Diamond Mountain Mark West Fire Safe Council project that we're working on. Big sort of community planning, watershed planning effort. Jill already talked about the Walla River watershed and in the coastal tributary consortium that we're trying to put together. Another big watershed plan, multi-property, public engagement. There's a lot of people, oh God, yeah, big change at the RCD. If people haven't heard already, our executive director, Valerie Quinto, is the new executive officer of the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. So we are without our fearless leader. And so that is a big change, and there's a lot of, we're figuring it out over here. So that's probably the single biggest thing to report out. And yeah, I mean, I'm doing a lot of stuff and I can't think of what else. So we'll just pass.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So next is Jason Mills and then Caitlin Cornwall.
Hey everybody, good to see some familiar faces. It's been a while, I feel like. We've been busy as usual. I guess significant news, I'm sure Caitlin will inform the group as well, but I did drop in on that Sonoma County Board of Supervisors meeting where Kim presented all of his suggestions for the upcoming annual budget for those funds. Looks like $3 million to applied projects, 600,000 to education and so forth. So I did weigh in at the end because some of the public comments kind of threw me. It seemed like there were a lot of people really concerned with biodiversity, which is great. But I heard things like people concerned about biopower, biofuels, people concerned about, tree companies dropping big trees that don't really make isn't the best use of funds for fuel reduction, where we should be doing more thinning. So there were good comments, and there were some kind of coming out of nowhere. I just tried to point out again that I feel like, habitat restoration and preserving biodiversity can be done in conjunction with fuel reduction, depending on who's actually performing the work or overseeing the work. So I guess it all boils down to like quality control, but I think it also boils down to who's actually performing the work. So I put in an endorsement for continuing the support for the Santa Rosa JC boot camp, which I feel like is like the perfect way to enhance our working class locally. So really happy to hear from Biana that they've got 30 interns this round, and just really curious to see where we're going to go as a county to put these funds to best use. And I'm out here with my team right now. We've pulled a half acre of ice plant and put in 700 natives. So pretty excited to wrap up restoration season, and we're moving into fuel reduction starting next week. So busy, busy, busy. Thanks, everybody.
Cool, thanks, Jason. So Caitlin and then Anne Krelock.
Hey, everybody. I'm glad I'm not the only person who is saying it's been a while since I've been here. It's nice to see everybody. Sonoma Ecology Center, busy, busy, busy. Also, yeah, that meeting that Jason just referred to at the supervisors, I was part of a small group meeting with kind of traditional environmental activists who have like a long, long history in Sonoma County. Some of whom definitely have these beliefs that the biomass power industry is taking over Sonoma County. And I don't know exactly where that exactly comes from, but our desire to meet and work with those people was to show that there is some common ground among the environmental community. And then when it's articulated well, it can be more powerful than a bunch of people just kind of off on their own. So I hope that was successful in doing that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we are hiring for a position that I think is actually really exciting. I kind of wish I could take the position myself. We have won a grant from the Vegetation Management Program to put together what we're calling a handbook of principles and practices for vegetation management. And the idea is that in Sonoma County, when people are out there working on the land, they should be accomplishing many, many objectives at the same time, not just preparing for fire, but also enhancing biodiversity and capturing water and, and also like reducing maintenance over time. But a lot of people don't know how, as Jason was just saying, how to do the things that will accomplish all of those things. So we want to work with all of you on that project, but we've been really stymied in getting it rolling. We just haven't had the staff capacity. So I'm going to email the list, the job posting, and it's also on our website. And we would love you to send some smart, awesome people our way so that we can help get this thing done for the county. A lot of people think it's something that's needed, kind of coalesce best practices for multiple objectives. Thanks.
Nice. Thanks, Caitlin. So Anne and then Fred.
Hi guys. Yeah, it's been a while for me as well. Nice to see your faces. I am Anne Krelock, formerly with Sonoma County Water Agency for many years. Now with the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. It's a joint powers authority that uses taxpayer funds to build wildfire resilience for the county. Mostly what I've been working on for the last year and a half is building the environmental compliance program and making sure we are doing everything in kind of a holistic way where we're balancing ecological needs and wildfire risk reduction. And so we have a variety of projects going. One that we're implementing right now is a 38-mile long shaded fuel break. It's like a bathtub ring around, basically behind the back fences of a number of communities in Central Marin. It's like, I don't know, through 8 or 9 different jurisdictions. So yeah, a lot of planning, a lot of managing crews in the field. Use the CalVTP for that environmental process. We'll be using that again for another shaded fuel break in the Novato area. Should have that environmental process done this spring. And that shaded fuel break is going to be 60 miles long. So yeah, check back in and see how many gray hairs I have by the end of that process. Thanks everybody listening in today. It's going to be very interesting. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Anne. Yeah, and it's been, I think everyone's been curious about what you guys are doing down there. So, you know, whenever you can, please update us. Maybe we can even hear, you know, schedule some time to hear from you specifically so we make best use of your time. Okay, great. Thank you. So Fred and then Tamara.
Not a lot to report. It's been raining doing, my name is Fred Ufred, doing private forestry around Sonoma County. And the most exciting project I'm working on right now is doing logging for biodiversity and for old growth, and trying to get those prescriptions documented up on the Jenner Headlands, which is a great deal of fun, cutting trees for wildlife fun and profit. And that's about all I've got right now.
Okay, Tamara and then Lynn.
Hi, everyone. I'm relatively new to this group and also wear a lot of hats in this space. I'm an associate director on the Gold Ridge RCD. I work for Forestry Collective, which is using small diameter timber in a new manufacturing facility that we're developing. And I also am in the background of Regenerative Forest Solutions. We're working on the Diamond Mountain Mark West project with Fire Safe Sonoma and some other projects. And I'm a private forest landowner at Green Valley Farm and Mill. So there's lots of ways that I'm engaged in this work, and I'm in a learning growth moment, really, with all of these practices, and just kind of doing it on the land and then learning how to help other landowners and trying to figure out how to get logs to the mill. So that's something that we'll continue to bring forward to this group, is how do we actually get the small diameter and removal of the biomass so it can actually be utilized and stored as carbon in products, to hopefully develop economy around this work. Because as a forest owner, realizing the abundance of material and the inability to afford for the practices, even though there is more funds coming down the pike, it's actually very difficult as a private forest landowner to manage your forest effectively and ecologically and economically. Yes, all those things. Great to be here. Looking forward to hearing from everybody else today too.
Awesome. Great, thanks, Tamara. So Lynn and then Tess.
So up in the Upper Mark West watershed, we were very lucky to escape any major damage from all the water that we got, all the storms, all the tremendous downpours up here. So we were worried about landslides. We had some fallen trees, we had some road closures, we had some rocks, but basically no major landslides, and we are counting ourselves very lucky. As Jason and Tamara mentioned, the Diamond Mountain Mark West Watershed Project CAL FIRE grant is kicking off this Saturday with a meeting that Jason's going to talk more about. I should say RCD just finished the shaded fuel break on Calistoga Road. And I think the greatest thing about that, not only that it got done and the work got done, but the work looks really good, that it reassured people that work can be done, trees can be cut and things can be limbed and thinned without major devastation to their roadside. So people are really, really happy with that. And it's done a lot to build our credibility up here for future projects that we want to do. So a big shout out and thanks to RCD for that project. And we are also doing our winter social in a couple of weeks. That's one of the ways that we get our community together. And one of the major focuses of that this year will be to become a FireWise community. That's mostly focused on a community survey that's primarily looking at defensible space and home hardening. But again, it's a lot of community building and networking and trying to get people to engage in this process. So we're happy up here.
That's great. I'm glad to hear about the success of your project.
Yeah.
Okay, so Tess and then Ron.
Hi, I'm Tess. I'm a Grizzly Corps fellow at the Goldridge RCD. And currently my main focus is working on our RCPP Forestry and Grasslands grant. It's been a slower process, but we hopefully will get it rolling in February and have applications and start taking applications in February. And yeah, for me personally, just with forestry, I'm working on getting my firefighter type 2 certification, and I have my field training day this Saturday. So I'm excited for that.
Yay, that's so great. I didn't know you were doing that. And yeah, the grant that Tess is talking about is a new grant that we have not rolled out yet, but it is a equip style incentives program for how many counties? I'm trying to think. It's Sonoma,
Napa, Solano, Yolo,
Mendocino.
I think Mendocino. I think there's 6 counties in total, and Lake County.
And Lake. Okay, yeah, there's a lot of overlap with some other things, but yeah, it's a huge regional program, and it's focused on basically equip practices in forest and grasslands for wildfire resilience. So we're still kind of rolling out the ranking criteria, who's eligible, how to apply. And since we're going a little slower than expected, we may not actually be taking applications until a little later, March or April even, where we were hoping February, but that doesn't seem like it's going to happen right now. So, but we'll keep you all posted on that one. Thanks, Tess. So then Ron and then Sophia.
I'm a director with Sonoma Resource Conservation District, and I was at the meeting with Jason and Jill, and they pretty much covered where I've been. But one thing I noticed about the discussion with everybody was that even though we got significant rain, it didn't happen all at once. Compared to a lot of places in California, very few landslides, very few road failures. Some of our early ground cover, seeding and stuff like that has taken hold, and so I think we did a few right things during the drought when we thought it would never rain, and I'm encouraged by the work that we've done in the past, and I think that's a good sign that we can just continue. And thanks to the Grizzly Corps guys for coming in, and we used to have AmeriCorps that did kind of what you did. Does AmeriCorps still exist as it was? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, it's nice to have those skilled bodies to give something to do. minds and bodies.
Yeah, and speaking of, Sophia is is next, and she's also a core member. And then after Sophia will be Leslie Liu.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm the Grizzly Corps Fellow at Pepperwood. What we have going on right now is we have a pile burning workshop on the 21st. It's sold out, but we are hoping to have another date due to a lot of interest around that. And then we have 250 acres. We're planning for mechanized thinning. So that's where Devin is right now with CAL FIRE as part of our EMP. And in personal news, Tess, I will also be at the field day this Saturday because I will be completing my FFT2 training as well.
Nice. That was so great. All right. So Leslie and then Courtney.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Liu. I work for Sonoma Ag and Open Space. It's nice to see you all. I worked on a shaded field break and thinning project at Calabasas Creek, which we've now transferred to Parks for their fabulous stewardship. It's nice to see Brooke on the call. Since we transferred Calabasas, I've switched over to community resources department. And I am going to be working with landowners to help them manage their lands in an ecologically focused way as they do their activities like trail building, fuels management, grazing, and all that stuff. I also am a practitioner of prescribed fire, and I try to get on every single prescribed fire that I can because it's so important and so necessary. And also trying to infuse diversity, equity, and inclusion in all the activities that we do. I think I might be like one of the only diversity candidates here on the screen. So that's really, really important work. And we also have 2 upcoming positions. We have 2 stewardship technicians that haven't flown yet, but will be flying very soon. And they'll be really awesome spots. These positions are super highly competitive. So anyway, stay tuned.
And sorry, Leslie, what were those positions again?
Stewardship technicians?
Stewardship.
Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. We filled those. But stand by, we have 2 community resources positions coming up.
Nice. Okay, well, thank you for all your good work. And feel free to invite others to this meeting that you think might be interested and want to plug in.
Thanks, I'm really excited to be here. I think it's like my first.
Yeah. Well, anyway, great to see you in this space. So Leslie and then Courtney, Courtney and then people have moved around a little bit, and then Brooke.
Hi, everybody. I am a new face to this group. Want to thank Robert Aguero for inviting me to participate. Thank you all for having me. I am a newer hire over at Permit Sonoma, another senior environmental specialist, primarily working on the grant funded projects. So the hazard mitigation grant projects that Sonoma County has had underway, some for a few years, some are just starting up. I'm mostly focused on hazard fuels reduction project, which is one of the larger landscape scale projects looking, outside of the home defensible space zone. We're going to be working with a lot of you. I know there's a lot of familiar names that I'm starting to learn and hopefully putting faces to those names in the next few months as well. But a lot of you are involved in our technical advisory ship, or I'm going to be meeting with you on more of a community basis to understand what projects are already going on out in the landscape across the different partners, and then think about where we can potentially support that with the funds that we have for the fuel reduction project. We're going to be trying to simplify our process. We have pretty tight timelines on it. So the planning portion is done at the end of this year, and then we're going to be kicking off planning on a next grant project that came through, the BRIC project, which is much larger. That one's in the kinds of tens of millions range, and it's going to be incorporating not only the landscape but also defensible space and home hardening aspects. So I hope to meet and see a lot of you over the next few years. I'm still in my probationary period, so fingers crossed on that I'll be around. But that's, I think, all that I have for now. Looking forward to meeting you all and working with you.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. Yeah, really excited to have you here and look forward to working with you more in the future. Brooke, and then is there anyone else? Oh, and then Joe, and then I think we might have covered everyone.
Good morning, everyone. Brooke Edwards, Sonoma County Regional Parks. We are looking at hopefully finishing our first Cal VTP this first quarter of 2023 for Shiloh and Foothill. So that will bring us up to CEQA level compliance to do fuel reduction work, but more importantly, applies prescribed fire to both of those parks. In tandem with that Cal VTP, we are working on developing 2 burn units at Shiloh. And so hopefully we'll have everything lined up for next fall, and we'll get a couple burns in broadcast burns at Shiloh Regional Park. We are also looking to apply to the CAL FIRE fire prevention grant, getting some planning money to develop a forest management plan for our Mono Rio Redwoods park that's not yet open to the public. Planning money also for our Mark West park, which was hit by the Tubbs fire and really needs a lot of help and some expertise brought to look at that park and figure out what exactly we need to do in terms of vegetation management and fuel reduction, prescribed fire as well. So hopefully we'll get some planning money for that and get those rolling and have some plans in place in the next couple of years. We also are going to be running a natural resource
meeting here, but you're more important
job. Hey, Fred. Natural resource assistant job at regional parks, and that's basically going to be a crew, a field crew leader. So working out in the field, primarily helping to lead the different vegetation crews out there that are focused on vegetation monitoring, invasive plant detection and removal, and then also fuels reduction work. So forest thinning and prescribed fire. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks, natural resource assistant job will be posted, as well as our natural resource park aid. And so that's kind of our entry level field technician, if you will. And so those 2 jobs will be posted in the next couple of weeks. And I will definitely forward that on to many of you here today and Brianna as well, so she can post that on her job board. That's it for me.
Super, great, thanks, Brooke. Then Joe.
Howdy, y'all. Good to see all your familiar faces. Not a huge ton to report out to you guys. We're super busy over here at NRCS, just trying to get folks signed up and make sure everything's clear with their paperwork. There's been a lot of weird internal shifts as far as how our processes go with that, so it's been kind of a storm. But working through that and then getting folks ranked and submitted for equip March 1st, and we've got quite a few folks going into the running this year, and then also trying to figure out where our place is and how we're working together on that RCPP building fire resiliency plan, and kind of making that up, all of us together as we go, seems like. But no, it's really excellent, and got quite a few folks that are interested in that as well. So on a personal note, finally got my California Burn Boss certificate, so I'm going to be opening up my task book here pretty soon for that, and hopefully start streamlining folks into the equip program for prescribed burning as well. So we're going to be working on that pretty soon. And yeah, if you have folks that are interested in looking at funding, send them my way for prescribed burning. Yeah.
That is awesome. Just taking some notes. Oh, cool. We've got a burn boss and we've got firefighter 2s. We almost have a crew here. Getting there. Well, great. So did I miss anyone? Did we hear from everyone? I hope so. Okay, good. Oh, Dee, sorry, you're in the middle of the pack. You want to say hi?
Hi, I'm fine without reporting anything right now. I'm looking forward to getting into the other agenda items. I can't seem to find an agenda.
Okay, I can help you with that. I'll send one over.
Thank you.
I could have just a quick update on the CWPP.
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see we have
I just popped in. I'm sorry. I was
Okay.
running a little late.
Yeah,
I just wanted to kind of let everybody know, Robert, I don't know if Robert touched on the CWPP at all, but we did get a minor, an extension from FEMA, sort of surprisingly, on the CWPP, which is buying us a couple of months to build up the project entry portal. So as of now, the comments are closed. We're about to post the comment draft, which hasn't been done yet. And we're looking at taking that to the board in, I think it's May 9th. And so what we're building now is the slightly revised project portal, which will make entering your projects onto the map and list a little bit easier, hopefully, than it was last time. Few less questions. There's still questions. They will be evaluated by a committee, not for much more than does it adhere to the principles as outlined in the priorities in the CWPP, and is the land your land? Or are you submitting a project on somebody else's land for which you do not have approval from the landowner, because that was problematic last time. So those are kind of right now going to be the two cuts we're going to use, and then after evaluation, that list will become public. So we're really, really wanting to get as many projects listed in there as we can, so that we see where there's 15 projects in the same area where we can encourage people to work together, or contrarily, here's an area of really high risk, there's nothing here. Who can we get to launch a project in this area? And also as and if funds become available, it would be really awesome to have a map with everybody's ideas on it, so we can go, hey, there's a project, maybe we can fund that one. So that's the idea, is to have that global list of everybody's projects, prospective, in process, or done, that can all be listed on that map, and layers can be turned on and off, so that we do have that global view across Sonoma County of what everybody, agencies, community groups, and everybody is thinking about or has in process. So that's the plan. So when that portal opens up again, I really hope that I can get lots of you to spend the time, and there'll be a little time. We're trying to make it easier. We heard you. This was too hard. There is data we need, and it has to be entered by somebody, and that has to be you. So there will be some time, but we're hoping to make it easier. And we're moving forward, and we're pretty excited about that piece of it. So that was my update. The update is that we have a little reprieve, but the CWPP is coming.
that's great. So Caroline, I think it would be great for us to spend some time at one of our future meetings just going through the steps of how to enter projects. And I think you said last time it takes about 10 minutes to enter a project. Maybe we could even oh no, maybe
Yeah, it was before. I don't know how long it's going to take when we're done doing the updates, right? My guess is it's more like probably 20, but I don't know. And some of that is going to depend on the computer skills of whoever's entering it. If you're savvy with the computer and you have a pretty well baked idea of what your project is going to do, and you can say that in a very short word span, we're keeping the project descriptions and stuff, they're short, because I don't want to hear about risk. I don't want to hear about any of that stuff. I just want to hear, what are you doing and how are you going to do it? What are the outcomes? So it's pretty basic information, but making a big project really small in words actually requires considerable forethought. So I think that's where it can be hard, but there's not going to be a lot of typing to do, but there will be a lot of thinking involved. And then the mapping, I don't understand why people find it so hard, but a lot of people find it really difficult to draw the perimeters on the map. So whatever we can do to make that easier for people, we will definitely be doing more tutorials, or I don't know how we're going to do that. It shouldn't be that hard. It's got, you know, click, 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 done. And these aren't official project boundaries, right? This is a kind of, this is vaguely what we want to do. So it's not going to correlate to whatever you put in your grant application necessarily. So it should be much easier for folks.
Okay. Well, great. Yeah, let's talk about how to set up some kind of tutorial for people so that everyone knows how to do it, and that we kind of make some time to do it. Because I think it's hard, you know, it's like one of those things that's on your to-do list for a long time, and then you're like, oh, didn't ever, you know, set aside time for it, didn't happen. And
well,
I know
let's all meet at, you know, for cocktails and project entry. We meet in town, we all sit with our laptops. Yeah, let's get 100 in. Yeah. Yeah, because the more data we have in there, the more projects we have, the better a tool this is going to be for all of us for planning well into the future for delivery of effective, high quality projects that address risks as identified by all of y'all.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this kind of global view that you're talking about, just getting all of our information in one place. So I'll reach out to you, Carolyn, or you to me, and we'll kind of figure out something before the next meeting, or whenever you need us to start entering the projects.
Yeah, for sure, pop me an email because I'll probably forget.
Okay.
On my plate.
No problem. Okay, well, looks like we are just about on time to move on to the next item, which is some updates about the conference planning. So Brianna, happy to see that you're here because we need to get your ear, maybe not so much during this meeting, but a different one, in which we you know, go over our program with you and see if Shone is willing to host us and at what date. Right now we are looking to the last weekend in April, so that's the 29th and 30th. And if that doesn't work, then maybe the first weekend of May, but we're just kind of trying to keep it late spring. Some exciting updates for you all about the conference is that Kim and I have been working on fundraising, as well as Dee and Sashi, and good news. Kim made a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, which is the Board of Ag and Open Space, to fund the conference, and they are putting $100,000 towards it. So that is a great budget for us to work with. I think we can put together something really special. We're going to probably continue to fundraise through some of our traditional partners, just to kind of bring everyone in and make sure we have all the bells and whistles that we need. But I'm feeling really, really good about that baseline funding. So that's my great news. And then the other part of it is that we have a huge laundry list of things that we need to do. So I have created that list, and I'm looking forward to meeting with the steering committee for that project. If you're on that, if you already have been plugging into the planning for the conference, or if you would like to start plugging in, I'm going to drop a link in the chat to basically a doodle poll, which asks you, when would you be reliably available to meet? I want to have weekly meetings. I know not everyone can make weekly meetings, but if you can make maybe half of them, and you know, you can kind of come, take a task, do some work on your own, and then report back. That's all we need. I just need to have some kind of dedicated assistance on this project. So go ahead, open up that link, kind of drop in your time. It's just there's no dates associated with it. It's just Monday through Friday. And we're looking for, we're looking for dates Tuesday through Thursday. So, you know, right now I think Thursday is looking pretty good. Maybe you could get like a Thursday morning meeting or something, but I want to find something that works for most of you. So again, if you can, go in and drop your availability, and then I'll start planning recurring meetings for this spring with you. The other thing is high on our agenda is we have a basic program put together, and now I really want to go and get landowner input on the program that we put together, because landowners are our primary audience, and we want to make sure that what we have created is something appealing, and that it answers the questions and gets to the heart of what landowners want to learn through a conference like this. So I have started a super, like, really no frills and super basic spreadsheet with the names of landowners, including some of you, that I would like to have us reach out to, kind of make a little introduction. Hey, this is a conference we're putting together. Here's our preliminary program. We want to hear your feedback. I want to gather feedback in two ways. I'd like to have a meeting, like a Zoom meeting with landowners if they can make it, and then also a survey for those who can't make it. And I haven't developed the survey yet, but it'll basically be based on like the topics that we're covering already and the ones that like they know they want to know about, and they can provide that feedback somehow. So if you have landowners that you like know personally, that you think, oh, this person would be really interested, they would love to look over this, I'm sure they'll want to attend the conference, put in their contact information. And I just want to kind of get a list started so that I know you guys, we're all thinking about who are we going to talk to, and then probably I'll create some sort of template email that then we can all send out to our contacts. So I just dropped that link into the chat. What else? I think those are my main things right now, but I'd like to start having us meet next week. I guess the other thing is, I have a bunch of tasks. Either we all kind of like divide them up and take them on in different, whatever capacity we can. Or we all, now at this point, we have funding, we can actually hire a coordinator. So if you happen to know of someone who would be a really great coordinator for this event and needs part-time work, we can do that. So, reach out to me. I would love to get, a dedicated person to kind of, take on a big chunk of the work that needs to be done. And basically that work is, reaching out to the speakers, finding a videographer, lining up catering, this is just basic event coordination. There's just a lot of moving pieces to keep an eye on. The marketing, setting up the Eventbrite or whatever we're going to use for signups, for registration, all of that kind of work. So if you know of someone who has done something like this before, or you think would be really great at it and is available, please reach out to me, and I'll put my email in the chat. Because otherwise it's going to be mostly me and me hounding you for your help, which also works. But I just, if we can find someone on short notice who's available, it would be great. Sweet. Thanks for this, guys. Any comments or questions?
Yeah, I wanted to see if we'd secured a date with the JC.
I don't think that we have had a chance to talk with the JC yet about that, but I hope we will get in touch with them very soon.
Hey, should I not call it the JC? Should I always call it SRJC? I want to be respectful. When I was a kid, they were JCs,
I think either's fine.
Okay.
But yeah, so obviously getting a date down is the other highest priority. We have a couple of high priorities, but it's getting landowner feedback is really important. It's kind of an iterative process where it's like we create something, then we have landowners look at it, and then they tell us, no, not that, but this, and then we go back and we kind of like revise, and then in the same time, I want to be reaching out to speakers and sort of getting their tentative, promise that they can be there, and then we'll sort of like have to, turn it around if it's like, okay, now we need to subtract speakers or add speakers. Like it has to kind of, at this point, everything needs to happen at once, because we have so little time. So yeah, there's just a lot of that going on. Okay, great. So thanks for your notes about potential candidates. Do send them on to me. Super stoked to find someone great to work with.
Adriana, I also wanted to give a plug of thanks to Kim and the Open Space District and the PG&E settlement funds because they're also putting in a budget amount for paying for Adriana's time to work and be our administrator for this committee. And it's essential, you know, that the way we are so effective is because we have Adriana. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that, and that she decided she's going to stay, you know, with us. So anyway, a lot of thanks for that.
Oh, thank you, Dee. Yeah, well, I'm really excited to continue working with everyone and do these cool projects and get more capacity going too. I've been really low capacity the last year because of my, you know, split work and studies and everything, but I'm excited to kind of you know, ratchet it back up and hopefully get us more organized and doing even more cool things. Okay. All right, well, if there's no other questions or comments about the conference right now, I think we can transition over to Jason. So for the next hour, Jason will be, well, actually for the next 30 minutes, he'll be kind of giving us an introduction on wildland fire behavior. And then after that, I wanted him to, if he doesn't mind, kind of transition us into a conversation about counteracting wildfire misinformation. And that's based on some resources he sent back in September, I think it was, to the working group listserv that had just a really fabulous resource for thinking about, you know, what misinformation is out there and how to combat and kind of pre-bunk and debunk it. So I thought it's a great topic for us to dig into any time of the year, but it's also, I think, helpful in advance of our conference, since that is, you know, we could be developing a resource, is my idea, that we can kind of provide to attendees of the conference too. So really excited to get us talking about that important topic. So first, Jason's gonna, you know, kick us off with some educational material, which I think will be a good foundation for us to then talk about the non-scientific things that we're hearing out there. So go ahead, Jason, take it away.
All right, well, I'll start off by saying that hopefully this is not going to be an hour, because this is supposed to be a 20-minute long presentation. I just finished this presentation, so you guys are my trial run. So thank you very much for being guinea pigs, because I have to give this presentation this weekend for a community group. And I'll just give you a little background that what I was hoping for with this presentation. I mean, I think it covers most everything. Hopefully it's not like too much for people, but I was hoping that the presentation, by covering everything, would get people who already know quite a bit about forest and fuels and how fire works on the same level as people, you know, who came at this with nothing, and hopefully isn't too complex. Although there's a few times, I mean, like, we start off with chemistry, so it starts off hard, but hopefully gets pretty easy. I mean, so we'll see. I don't know. Let's find out together if you think this is a good presentation, and if not, you can please tell me, because it's better to hear it here than you know, in front of from the intended audience. So okay, let's see. So this is my presentation on Introduction to Wildland Fire Behavior. I'm Jason Wells, registered professional forester with Sonoma RCD. I heavily adapted this presentation from a book. It's Fire in California Ecosystems. I have the second edition from UC Press. Highly recommend anybody who's interested in learning more about fire, how it affects California specifically, and how ecosystems change based on it, that they go check out this textbook. But the other thing too is that this presentation is pretty, it's text dense, because I'm hoping to print it out and have it as a resource that's available for people. So maybe that gives a little context as to why there's so much in here. But general overview of what I'm going to be talking about today: the fire as a physical process, the science of combustion. Fire requires three things, right? So heat, oxygen, and fuel. You can see the fire triangle is in the center of my sort of triple triangle complex that I've made over here. So in order for combustion to occur, you need heat, oxygen, and fuel. Wildland fire behavior includes topography, weather, and fuel. So those are all things that change basically the conditions for combustion to be happening over time. You can see the wildfire triangle in the middle. There's also fire regimes, which is what influences basically ecology. So this is like how often ignitions happen regularly or irregularly, what the climate of a condition is. So how would the fuels be prepped or whatever, and then the specific types of vegetation that are found in an area. So in our area, we live in a Mediterranean climate, so generally adapted to dry summers and wet winters. So we grow a lot of vegetation in the winter, and then in the summer, that vegetation is prime fuel for combustion. And we have a history of indigenous stewardship that included significant ignitions. So you know, in the fire history record, we have way more ignitions than what you would expect from just lightning or other natural causes. So anyway, this presentation is going to go over fire effects as well, the difference between fire intensity and fire severity, and it'll discuss how fire spreads, and then different fuel management types or tools that a manager might have in their tool belt. So mechanical, prescribed fire, grazing, and herbicide. So fire is a physical process. It's interestingly enough, it's basically the opposite of photosynthesis. So it's an oxidation process wherein the organic molecules contained within wood are volatilized and are then, with the addition of heat, they combust. The chemical calculation or formula is listed below for people who think that, you know, who find that interesting. But really the big thing here is that it is the C6H first piece there. That's your fuel that's located within the actual fuel. You add significant oxygen molecules. The byproduct is actually water, CO2, and a lot of energy. So a kilojoule is a measurement of energy. Fire can be extinguished by removing the fuel, reducing the amount of oxygen, or lowering the temperature of the fuel. Back to the fire triangle, those are the three pieces necessary for combustion to occur. In most wildland fires, combustion is incomplete, mostly because of moisture in the fuels. So a major heat loss happens to be from the vaporization of moisture, and I'll talk more about that in the preheating phase. The phases of combustion include preheating, gaseous, and smoldering phases. So in the preheating phase, this is the phase where basically you are heating the fuel to the point where it is starting to boil the water that's currently in the fuel. So when you have that much water that is starting to distill, an interesting fact is that it's actually the amount of water molecules that are in gas that compete with oxygen. And so if there's too high of a pressure of vaporized water, you can't actually get oxygen molecules in next to the fuel in a high enough percentage to sustain combustion as per that chemical calculation that was listed before. So basically, in order for something to combust, you need to heat it to the point where it gets most of the non-combustible water molecules to evacuate, and then heats the wood chemicals to a point where they are volatile and can combust. So pyrolysis is the chemical decomposition of wood at elevated temperatures, which volatilizes the material, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen that's in the wood until it's vaporized. So that's the first phase. Then you're in the gaseous phase of combustion. This is what most people think of when they think of flames, right? It's literally the oxidation of those chemicals from the fuel that are burning. So it's distilled gases from the wood. Water vapor and CO2 are released in that combustion process. And incomplete combustion results in condensation of water and particulates, which is what smoke is. So the more smoke and the more water, it greatly reduces the energy released from fire. And most people who have experience trying to build fires with wet wood have experienced this. A smoky fire is a wet fire, right? And then after the flaming front or the gaseous phase, you have the smoldering phase of combustion. So this is charcoal and other unburnt material that is just at a high enough temperature that it continues to burn through, but not as a gaseous combustion form. And so like the biggest thing about the smoldering phase is that it has long-term heat. And that long-term heat can significantly affect plants, seeds, and soil. By basically extended heat is the enemy of trees and of soil. It kills organic living things. So trying to avoid that. Fuel is the only factor that can be controlled prior to ignitions in the fire triangle. It strongly affects the rate of combustion and heat transfer within a given fuel. And in general, dry grasses support faster spread than an equivalent weight of woody debris under ideal conditions. And I'll talk more about why that is, because there are fuel characteristics that include surface area to volume ratio, so how dense something is versus how much surface area it has, the packing ratio or how fuels are oriented, fuel load, meaning how much fuel is in an area, live fuel moisture, because again, the water is important in the combustion process, or actually the absence of water. And then dead surface fuel moisture time lag classes. I'll talk about that because people talk about fuels in that way. So surface area to volume ratio, this should be actually pretty intuitive for anybody who's built a fire before. It's very important because the big thing about heat transfer and combustion is that it doesn't really seep too far into the log. So like you can imagine trying to start a fire with a big log in a single match. You wouldn't be able to actually raise the temperature of the fuel to the point where it could combust. But if you were to cut that piece of that log into a lot of tinder, smaller pieces, it's the same mass, but all of that has a much smaller or a much larger surface area in comparison. So you can actually heat that material up to the point where it begins that gaseous phase. So the ratio is important when we look at dead surface fuel moisture, because the greater fuel surface area also reduces the time that it takes for moisture in the fuel to reach an equilibrium point with relative humidity. So how much moisture is in the air. And I'll talk about that in 2 slides. The other thing is the packing ratio and fuel orientation. So fuel bed bulk density is how much fuel there is per unit of volume, which includes air. So back to the fire triangle again, you need oxygen as part of the combustion process. So the more available oxygen you have, the greater sustained fire you'll have. So a solid block of wood would have a packing ratio of 1. But outside of modeling, that's not that important. Really, what you need to know is that if the packing ratio is too high, so it's too dense, not enough oxygen can actually reach the fuel, so you can't have combustion. And if the ratio is too low, then there's not enough fuel for fire to spread from particle to particle, so you can't have sustained combustion if you cut out the fuel portion. So just thinking about when we build campfires, oftentimes you'll arrange them into a teepee or a log cabin arrangement because that maximizes the airflow while maintaining connectivity of fuels. So consider the differences between 2 fine fuels, and this is actually more about fuel orientation, a chip bed and a field of grass. So which orientation would be conducive to the movement of oxygen to support combustion? The field of grass, right? So with all of the particles oriented straight vertically, you can actually have airflow that moves in between everything, and you get grass to move through a fire very rapidly. Whereas a bed of chips, similarly sized particles, high surface area to mass ratio, but because they're so compacted, it will burn, but it's going to happen at more of a smolder. So it would be at that smoldering phase, long-term heat, long residence time, but low intensity, versus high intensity in a grass fire, but moving relatively quickly. Fuel load is the amount of fuel potentially available for combustion. So the more fuel available, the greater the potential energy that's stored in the fuel. And so you can have higher intensities if all of the components of the fire triangle are there and you have more fuel. So one interesting thing, and going back to bulk density, is that the rate of spread can actually decrease as the fuel load increases because that extra fuel becomes a greater heat sink. So this is especially important when you have situations where the fuel moisture is high. So if there's a lot of heavy fuels that require a lot of preheating, you have to have a lot of energy to be able to preheat the fuels to get to ignition. So this is why people find it very difficult to do prescribed fire in redwood ecosystems, because there's a lot of large fuel with high moisture content that lasts pretty long into the season until all of a sudden it's fall and you can get it to burn, but it can actually sustain heat for quite a while and can burn a lot. So you just have to be careful with how you design your fire prescription to manage that. But as I said, much of the response to fuel loading depends on the size, class of the fuel, its packing ratio, and whether it's dead or alive, because live fuels have higher fuel moistures. So this is the 4 time lag classes. I just wanted to be sure to mention them because people talk about things as 1 hour fuels, 10-hour fuels. You know, what does any of that stuff mean? And what fuel moisture is, or the time lag classes, actually has to do with the size of the material and the amount of time necessary for a dead fuel to reach 63% of equilibrium moisture content with the atmosphere. So if you got a real wet log and you go through the summer air is very dry, right, in comparison to the winter air. And so a 1 hour fuel is the kind of fuel where within 1 hour, it will equalize to today's temperature, right? Or excuse me, the humidity in the air. Versus a 100-hour fuel will obviously take multiple days and it's going to take a while. So and I wonder if I got my cursor here. The bottom here, you can see this is basically your daily interaction. This is temperature and humidity. So every day you've got temperature highs, temperature lows, and you've got humidity highs and humidity lows. Up here, we're talking about fuels because the fuel moisture in the fuel is going to be way higher than atmospheric moisture. And so all that I really included this for is just to show that there's a time lag. It takes a while for large fuels to be able to come back down, whereas your fine fuels will have a very great change depending on the density. So move on to fire behavior. Basically, if there's sufficient fuel quantity and continuity, conducive weather, and an ignition, a fire is going to occur. Fire can spread through the ground, surface fuels, crown fuels, or a combination of the 3. Surface fires generally burn litter, woody fuels, low vegetation like shrubs with an active flaming front. Ground fires burn in the canopies of vegetation with or ahead of the surface fire. And ground fires burn soil organic matter, roots, or peat, and burn as a slow-moving, smoldering fire. Ground fires are the most destructive of all of the kinds of fire here, especially to our ecosystems that are adapted to frequent fire. You'll notice that there's around this area after the fires, you have a lot of trees that resprout, right? Like redwood resprouts, bay laurel resprouts, most of our, oaks, they come back. But if you kill the root system, they're dead. So trying to avoid ground fires wherever possible is important, not only ecologically, but also operationally, because they can burn for a really, really long time and you can't really put them out. So fire behavior is the active cumulative effect of a number of factors that influence the flaming front, surface fire spread, crown fire spread, and spotting. So the flaming front is the area of the fire between its leading edge, where fuels are igniting, and the trailing edge, where fuels are finishing that gaseous phase. So this is all within the gaseous phase, not smoldering. So properties of the flame zone include the forward rate of spread, residence time, and the flaming zone depth. And basically, the way that this works is the fire is moving in a certain direction. What causes that spread or direction is usually going to be something like wind or topography. So hopefully that will be explained in fire spread, where we're looking at fire spread being affected essentially by topography, weather, and fuels and vegetation. If we went back to the first slide, you would see that wildland fire triangle calling out topography, weather, and fuels, vegetation. So within topography, there's slope and aspect, right? Slope is going to make it, as you can see in this upslope fire, where you're spreading radiation and convection from heat. So it preheats the fuel that's in front of it, and it makes it go faster. So the rate of spread is determined by the heat source and heat sink. That heat sink being the unburned fuels that require energy to get it to the point of combustion, and the heat source being the thing that's already burning. So heat transfer comes in three types. There's radiation, which you can see on this upper thing here, which is basically, radiative heat is usually through a medium like air or water. Convection is the upward lift of heat, and conduction is particle to particle spread. So generally in wildland fires, conduction is not usually what's spreading heat, because air is a terrible conductor of heat. So ground fire spread, there's three different kinds of basically ground fire. There's passive ground fire, where a single tree or a group of tree will torch out. This is super common in even prescribed fire or fire under decent conditions, is that you can basically have a situation where the fire line intensity, so the intensity from the fire on the surface fuels, is high enough to light the lower crowns. So that's essentially your ladder fuel situation, right? But without any wind or without like excessive canopy fuels, that's going to basically maintain within one or a couple of trees that might torch off. It's not going to be a raging active ground fire. An active ground fire is usually going to occur when you have that mix of a fire coming up through the ladder fuels, and then you combine that with something like wind that's actually going to actively connect the fuels together, and you can have a fire. You can actually have an independent ground fire, where the steep topography or very high wind speeds can actually have the flaming front move out ahead of the surface fire. This is usually unsustainable, because for most ground fires, you need to have fuel on the ground that is contributing to that preheating stage for the fuels that are in the canopy. So without having that convective heat coming off of the ground, most fires aren't going to be able to make it that way. So it's usually a very extreme event where without surface fuels, you are maintaining a crown fire. Spotting are trees that are ignited during any of the crown fire stages and snags. So they're basically firebrands. So big burning pieces that move out ahead of the flaming front and start numerous spot fires or individual fires. Characteristics of torching trees and embers, the intervening area, and the receiving fuel bed determine the distance and probability of a new fire. So if you've got winds that are pushing in and you have a hill that has receptive fuel underneath it, that's going to start fires. So what fuel bed types would be the most likely to ignite rapidly, and what types would be contributing more to spotting? Well, a more rapid fuel bed would be something like dry grass or a 1 hour fuel, fine fuels, whereas the type that would be more likely to contribute to spotting are probably going to be in larger fuels, 10 hour, 100 hour fuels that can actually sustain through the air. So, that did a double. So large embers are usually not lofted as high, and they can't travel as far as small embers, but small embers will usually burn out before they land anywhere. Whereas large embers are still burning by the time that they land on the ground and they start new fires. In certain high intensity conditions, you'll get fires that that can throw firebrands a mile or more ahead of the flaming front. So, these are the conditions that we're really trying to fix or get ahead of when we're doing a lot of our fuels management. We're trying to reduce the not only kinds of fuels that are going to turn into those large firebrands that start new fires, but we're also trying to reduce the amount of area that is a conducive fuel bed. So if the ember lands on a receptive fuel bed, the fine fuel moisture and temperature determine whether or not there's going to be a spot fire. So that's where we want to be managing our fine fuels. Fire effects. So fire severity is the magnitude of the effect that it has on the environment. And so that would be something like soil health and plant mortality. So high severity fire is one that has negative effects. High intensity fire is one that puts out a lot of heat at one time. So it's on a time lag. So a lot of energy really quickly is a high intensity fire. So you can have a high intensity, low severity event, like a big grass fire, moves through quickly, very flashy. That's high intensity, but the soil was totally fine. And in fact, there's probably still seed that's in that soil bed. That's low severity. But you could also have a high severity, low intensity fire, like a large chip bed that is burning through for a long time and no one monitored it. And it's just burning right up next to a bunch of trees, long-term sustained heat, all those BTUs going into the ground and killing off roots, and then you end up having a bunch of dead trees. Or you can have a high intensity, high severity photo or scenario, which is basically what photo number 2 here is. This is the same tree that was in the Kincaid fire area before and after the Kincaid fire. So it got pretty hot, and you can see the soils there, or the grasses there, torched off pretty good, and most of those trees had torching all the way to the tops. So pretty intense and severe fire. So fuels management is the practice of modifying those fuels to affect fire behavior in order to achieve certain fire effects. And when managing forests and wildlands and their fuels, it's important to remember a fundamental principle of ecology is that where growing space is made available, something's going to grow. So if we allow bare mineral soil and a seed gets in there with water, it's going to germinate, and fuels will continue to amass over time without intervention. So the following tools are available to help with that intervention: mechanical treatments, prescribed fire, prescribed grazing, or chemical treatments. Mechanical treatments are those that involve the actual physical cutting or mulching. So that could be done by hand crews with chainsaws, or it could be done by machine with a masticator head on it. Hand crews, they have high costs because of the amount of time that it usually takes to conduct the treatment, and personnel are almost always the most expensive line item. So time spent driving, walking, dragging fuels, and navigating difficult topography are going to increase your costs. So when you're designing a treatment, keeping all of that kind of stuff in mind is important. The pros are that the treatments can be completed immediately. So just when you're done, you're done. With prescribed fire, and we'll talk about that later, there's windows where you're going to get the effects that you want. And sometimes waiting for those windows can be frustrating. Permitting is pretty simple, very simple with hand crews because there's limited ground disturbance. You have low liability concerns. Everybody's used to doing that kind of work. This kind of work can be completed by landowners or non-professionals if you're doing your defensible space or if you've got time enough to work on your property. And it can be completed on relatively steep slopes. But again, as those slopes increase, your costs are going to go up. The cons are that it's one of the highest cost per acre rates. The slash needs to be treated. So once you've done the work, you're basically limited to either what's lop and scatter, where you are cutting and laying the fuels on the ground, hoping that they will decompose. That increases your fuel loads until that decomposition, and it can take decades. And in this area, especially in areas away from the coast, it's something you should really be thinking about because that's a lot of fuel that you're making available for a surface fire. but it can be good mulch cover for erosion concerns and for steep slopes. That was actually why it was promoted for such a long time to be done. People were worried about erosion, so put down the mulch and you're good to go. And it can be applied to any slope. Piling and pile burning is limited to relatively flat slopes, requires retreatment. So you have to go back and burn it. You're not going to do the same thing in the same day. There's permits and liability concerns. And then if you have so many piles, you're going to actually have the potential for a lot of tree scorch unless you're able to find space to put those piles. And that can be difficult. So some of that can be limited with feeder piles where there's a central pile that you're burning that and using other material to feed into it. But that again is at a higher cost point because now you're paying somebody to actually stand there and feed the piles instead of burning a bunch of piles and monitoring them. Chipping, highly expensive because you have to move every single piece to the chipper and then it takes time to chip it. And then what do you do with the chip? So if you can leave it on the site, it's good mulch, but again, too heavy of a chip bed is going to burn low and slow. So if you can't rake out your chip to probably under 3 inches, you're gonna need to think about what you're doing. And then also removal of that chip is expensive. So if you have to end haul chip, that's really expensive. Mechanized equipment could include a forestry mulcher, an excavator, a log loader, something like that, where you're actually just using equipment. So it's different because it's heavy. It has the potential for impacts on the ground. Anytime you're using heavy equipment, there's just more considerations that you need to have. So you're generally going to need to have roads nearby, and you're generally going to have to be operating on slopes that are 40% or less. So the pro with it is that treatments can be completed immediately. Permitting is pretty simple, low liability concerns, way faster than hand crews, so it saves a lot of money. It's often one of the cheapest initial treatments that we have. Maintenance with other treatments could be a good idea. So like prescribed fire, for instance, once you've already cleared out a majority of the fuels from before or modified them in a way to make the fire intensity less. And then the other thing is that mastication in particular can leave a mulch bed. So depending on how you have your operator working, they can be mulching stuff that they then drive over. So, that's going to help incorporate it actually into the ground a lot more, and it's going to limit your erosion potential from running equipment. So just understanding the equipment and your operators is important from that respect. Cons is that it requires expensive equipment and training. It requires equipment mobilization. So there are fixed costs anytime that you bring that kind of material out because it costs money to move stuff. It's limited to slopes, as I said before, and broken topography can increase time and costs. You're going to run into that a lot in the Casadero type area where there's old skid trails, old roads, where it's like there's a big drop off. They can't move that equipment through there. They have to go around. That's going to increase your costs. And you shouldn't operate in saturated soil conditions for generally obvious erosion reasons. Prescribed fire is the controlled use of fire to consume fuels under ideal conditions. There's pile burning and broadcast burning. Pile burning is when you pile the material and you cure it and then you burn it. So pros is that it's pretty simple for landowners to accomplish this on their own, as long as we're talking about moderate fuel loads. Permits are pretty simple to obtain. Again, as long as we're talking about moderate fuel loads, fuels are actually reduced and not simply modified. So when you burn them, they're gone. When you modify them, all those BTUs until they decompose are on site. And that's sort of the problem with most of the other hand crew methods. And burn days are fun. Cons are that burn days are regulated and poor air quality days can result in no burn days. That can make it tough to just contract. So if you have to pay a crew to come out there, it just complicates things. It's not that it can't be done. Burn piles need to be monitored. So again, this is another cost issue. If the landowner isn't the one who's actually monitoring these piles, you're going to be paying a crew to stand around and watch piles. And that can be very expensive because, again, people are one of the most expensive things that we have. Hand-fed piles are limited in size, so you really can't get up to big piles if you're doing it by hand, because you physically can't get close enough. It gets real hot, so you're going to need equipment to be able to do large piles. And as I've got written here is that sometimes you can just have so many piles that you're increasing quite a bit of area and subjecting it to potential crown scorch. So then that's when you start doing feeder piles, where you're trying to mitigate the amount of, high intensity or potentially severe fire effects to 1 or 2 piles instead of 50. But that increases your costs and the amount of time that it would take to do it. Broadcast burning, pros, it can accomplish a relatively large acreage in a small amount of time. And on large scales, it can be relatively cheap. It's essential to restoring pre-colonial type forests, because this is what historically was happening in these areas. And again, the fuels are actually reduced and not modified. The cons is that often it's going to require a pre-treatment with a mechanical means to achieve your desirable effect, or even just to make it so that you can increase your safe burn window. Because again, this also runs into the same problems of just appropriate burn days. They generally require crews, water, and equipment. And with increasing complexity and fuel size, you might need larger crews and equipment to safely and effectively do your job. Permitting is moderately difficult. You need a smoke management plan, a burn plan. You need to be doing CEQA if you were working with agencies to pay for it, or to conduct it. And your burn windows, again, can limit you. So you can get a whole crew out there, and then you can find out that morning that we're not burning. So liability for property damage also necessitates working with a burn boss that hopefully has insurance. There was a recent legislation this year that created a prescribed fire liability fund pool to address this, but from what I understand, it is limited to $2 million per prescribed fire. So around here, it'd be pretty easy to run into $2 million in damages. So we'll see how things move forward in the future. But 5 years ago, we wouldn't have been talking about prescribed fire as any kind of option at all. So it's pretty amazing how the space has changed in a short time. I'm pretty sure I'm over time right now. I don't know.
You're fine. You can keep going.
Great. Yeah, because I'm almost done. So prescribed herbivory, it's the controlled use of animals to consume light fuels. It requires an astute understanding of the capacity of the land to support animal herbivory for any kind of grazing, right? So you don't want to have a situation where you have too many animals on site and not enough grass, because that would be, not good. You'd overgraze the situation, right? So, but that said, generally prescribed herbivory for the purpose of fuels management is done in a rotational paddock. So could be a mobile fence or just something that's set up with the idea actually that they are putting these animals in this area for an extended time to eat all the fuels. And so, as animals work, they generally start by eating the things that they like. And then when they're left with the things that they don't like as much, they finally get around to eating, the last thing on their plate. So, anyway, moving on from that though, different animals have different palates. Not animals are suited for grazing all fuel types. So some animals are just not going to eat woody fuels, right? Most grazing animals will be limited to targeting grasses and forbs, so horses or cows or any of that sort of thing. But some animals like goats can target small woody plants if they can physically reach them. They're actually pretty good at reaching quite a few fuels, but they're still limited to stuff within their reach. So managers also need to consider plant toxicity when deciding where to graze animals. So not to put something in a field with a bunch of star thistle or something and you've got horses, that'd be bad. So animals require food, water, fencing, and shelter. the food is the fuel in this case, but water, fencing, and shelter is going to make a huge difference for operational costs. Without on-site water, water is going to need to be brought in. Without fences, mobile units will need to be deployed or rented. Without shelter, animals need to be taken in nightly and brought back in the morning to avoid predation losses. So all of that includes time, diesel, mobilization expenses are huge. So if you can set up the infrastructure to keep the animals nearby or on site, that's going to limit your long-term expenses and greatly reduce the cost of doing something like prescribed delivery. And I'm just going to say, if you're utilizing grazing animals full time and not just hiring somebody to come in for a day, I would consult with a certified rangeland manager to determine what your property can support for a given animal, and just make sure that your plan makes sense. They know a lot more about animals and their needs than I do. Similarly, for prescribed herbicide, I'll start with a disclaimer that if you're interested in learning more about herbicide or chemical use, you should reach out to a licensed agricultural pest control advisor. So I am not a PCA. My knowledge of chemical use and appropriate applications is pretty limited, so I can only really speak in general. If I were to be prescribing something utilizing herbicides, I would be consulting with a PCA and getting a targeted prescription for exactly what vegetation type, the area, and other environmental factors, and actually having sort of an expert look into this kind of thing. But prescribed herbicide is the controlled use of chemicals to inhibit plant growth or cause cell death in targeted plants. There's a lot of different kinds of chemicals that you could use, hence there's a whole license devoted to it. Some of them disrupt the abilities of plants to uptake water or nutrients, and some of them cause uncontrolled growth. It basically causes cell death from a lack of resources. Some plants like eucalyptus and California bay laurel contain chemicals in their leaves that limit the growth of other species. That chemical adaptation is called allelopathy. And I just mentioned that just because, this is something nature does as well, right? Using chemical warfare essentially to win for growth. You just be open-minded, I think, when it comes to utilization of herbicide in appropriate contexts. I think that the context of fuels management, we should be, considering to limit regrowth of basal sprouting species and extending the efficacy of fuel reduction treatments by limiting new growth in fuel breaks. That's pretty much when we would use it from a context of fuels management. And I'll just say concerns about herbicide use are valid, and their use should be carefully controlled. There have been many studies conducted on commercially available herbicides, which give managers an idea about their effective time of use, potential for non-target drift, and potential adverse impacts to the environment. And again, consulting a licensed PCA, they're going to know a whole lot more about that. And then I just saw that there was a study that had been done by UCA&R recently that was looking at some of these organic herbicides, because people often ask me, what do I think about the use of lemon juice or something like that? And they were doing this on sod, like grasses, urban grasses. And they used some pretty heavy, like they used acetic acid, which is like way strong vinegar. And they found that it killed it for a short time, but things just came right back. And I thought it was an interesting quote that, they were talking about how some of the organic treatments are more acutely toxic to people than glyphosate or Roundup. And so they were saying this 20% acetic acid is very toxic to the person applying the herbicide. It'll burn your skin, hairs, and eyes. So you need to have PPE and a bunch of other things. So I just thought that was interesting, that not always just because it's organic doesn't mean that it's safe. So that was just a food for thought. But I think that the idea of utilizing herbicide in a controlled method is going to be important for the long-term success of especially our fuel breaks. If it's designed to limit regrowth, and we can apply a $500 an acre treatment that makes your treatment last from 3 years to instead 7+, we're going to be saving a lot of money in the future and maintaining a really an effective treatment. So anyway, just last thing here is just fuel management planning and just kind of how you look at the landscape. Often your goals and objectives are going to change the prescription that you choose to do. Goals often are in conflict with one another. So say there's wildlife values or water quality values, you know, and then people are worried about public safety. So these trees are, you know, falling hazard or a fire hazard or whatever, right? And so you need to, anytime that you are managing at any scale, you need to identify what it is that your values are, and then you need to weigh your values based on the highest and best use for a particular area. And so we can manage for all the things, but we might not be able to manage for all the things in the exact same spot. So, you know, the beneficial uses of forests in general are going to be water quality, air quality, soil quality, wildlife values, aesthetics, recreational value, a timber or an economic value, and then public safety is becoming increasingly something that we need to be thinking about with our forests. So that's my twice as long presentation as it needs to be. Are there any questions or thoughts?
Yeah, I can chime in, Jason.
Sure.
Great information. And first of all, can I have a PDF of this presentation so I can look through it and use it as kind of crib notes for everything you talked about? The other thing is lots of information, obviously lots of text, like you were saying. You want it as a handout for your audience, and I think you have that handout now. My suggestion was to then make the presentation be bulleted lists, and you had good illustrations in there, and the more you can kind of have an illustration that clearly shows the concepts that you're talking about. So I would lower the text and go to the illustrations, and then have what you just presented as the handout, like the full information. If you want more information, or anyone wants to dive into any one topic, they have it here in the longer extended version.
Yeah, that's super smart. And because I'm not going to be able to knock that down to 20 minutes unless I do a separate bulleted, this is what I'm trying to get at. But I appreciate the feedback. Joe?
Say I hypothetically had a neighbor to a property who was in the Nuns fire, so we're looking at 5 years post-fire with chaparral and knobcone pine dominated ecosystem, steep canyons, top of the Myakama Ridge, that type of situation. And they've got the bug in them that the insurance company says you need to solve your fire problem, which really involves not building the house there 40 years ago. What would you recommend for someone in that type of situation?
Well, I guess it depends on what their infrastructure looks like, and if they have access to that ridge, you could consider, and I guess it also depends on where their house is. No matter what,
worst possible, like you can't do a shaded fuel break. You built your house at the top of a chimney, and it's knobcone or chaparral all the way down to the valley.
Yeah. What I would think, extend your defensible space for sure is probably the easiest thing to do. So instead of sticking to 100 feet, push that out to 300. And then, from an ecological perspective, or for some of these larger properties, the exciting thing that I try to talk to people about for chaparral is how good of wildlife habitat it can be, and from a food source perspective. And so I like this idea of doing basically rotational prescribed burning, where we don't burn the whole thing off, but we burn it in checks, so that you're constantly having, like chamise needs 5 years to sort of regenerate and be able to get to the point where it can actually start seeding again and take another fire. So if you burned that in an 8-year rotation and you set things up, like that would be really cool just in terms of keeping palatability for animals. That's not what he's asking. You're worried about fire protection, right? So outside of trying to plant trees underneath, so maybe clearing out sections of chaparral or chamise and then trying to plant like a really drought resistant tree and then waiting until that really drought resistant tree could shade, you know, you're kind of limited. Picking a better spot for your house is a great spot. It's hard to say sitting here without looking at it to be super creative, but like basically, unless you can shade it out or you can live with the idea of doing prescribed fire right up next to your house, because that's another thing you could do. You just burn it a bunch of times until nothing comes back but grass. Do that. So.
Well, I was hoping to stump you a little bit more than that, but that's all good. Thanks.
Yeah. Caroleon, I think you were first.
Yeah, if you have a pre-existing house that's built in an inappropriate place at the top of the chimney, I don't think there's a lot you can do with the vegetation to solve that problem. The problem needs to be solved first with the structure.
Yeah.
And then moving out, because you're not going to stop the heat from rolling up that chimney. You're not going to do it. So the house needs to be able to withstand that. Retrofitting an existing structure to be able to do that is going to be a difficult process. But that's honestly, I don't think the solution is in adding to your defensible space. It's still going to blow through a chimney. So, but don't forget the structural piece of this discussion.
Absolutely. Arthur, I think you were up.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Thanks for a great talk. Really, yeah, I want that slide deck as well because there's so much to learn from it. And I just wanted to say about the Joe, your neighbor. This sounds like it's up in maybe the Cavedale area, somewhere up in there.
Might be.
Might be, okay. Because I'm actually doing an in-depth study of that area and looking at vegetation transitions after fire, and I'm going to be talking about that probably next month to this group, or maybe March. But anyway, one thing to keep in mind is that, you know, it may be all chaparral in the immediate aftermath of the fire, but if you wait a few decades, it's probably going to be much more woodland, much more forest, which in my mind increases the risk of a truly catastrophic fire. And because of all the, you know, there's more fuel, there's you know, so I'm not sure quite what to suggest, but just recognize that it's not going to stay, probably not going to stay chaparral, but it might just progressively get more dangerous. So in which case it seems like doing regular prescribed burnings on, Jason was mentioning like about every 8 years, somewhere in that realm probably would keep the fire danger a little lower. So that's all. I just, yeah, that these landscapes are a lot more dynamic than people usually think. So it's likely going to go from chaparral into forest over the next 30, 40 years, which is about, 40 years is about the cycle of these big fires.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Lynn, did you have a question or thought for Saturday's presentation?
I do. I have a couple thoughts. I'm thinking about this particular audience that you're going to be speaking to, which are landowners who are trying to help make decisions about what they do with their land. So, and I know you've got to cut this down from 45 minutes to 20. So I would just say that once you got to the sections on fire behavior and fuels management and the different types of fuels management, I thought that was all really good applicable information that landowners need to know in this planning process. I think some of the earlier slides on volume ratio or packing or the chemistry of fire as a physical process, I think that those are things that are great in a handout, but if you need to cut time, I would cut those slides because I glazed over on some of them, but you caught my attention every time you did one long slide. And then you said, basically, that's what I wanted to hear. Like, what does Jason say? Basically, how do we use this? And so the basically tips were really good. And the slides I thought were a little too much for me. I liked all of each one of the tools and how you explained it. I liked the pros and cons of those. I think that's really important. I think they were very discrete tools, and I'm not sure, frankly, I'm not sure if you talked a lot about sequencing from one to the other, like how grazing can be a pre-treatment for prescribed fire, or mechanical can be a pre-treatment for grazing. Because I think we want people to think long-term. So not that you're going to choose one and it's a one and done, but you're going to see how these different applications can be used together over time for sustainability long-term. And then I think the final thing I would really like to get out of this presentation is, how do you, as a registered professional forester, how do you use this information to determine the most effective or the most appropriate treatments to the particular kinds of landscapes that we as individual landowners are trying to make decisions about? So in a nutshell, lots of good information, but I know you've got to cut it down. And if you want to talk about this offline before Saturday, I'd be really happy to do that.
No, I think that's all really great feedback. I was thinking about that while I was putting it together. You know, I know that like most people are in that landowner group. And so that's why I have notes to bring it back to this is what it matters, right? But I also was thinking, well, there's some people in here who are like firefighters or who are like involved in that kind of thing. And maybe they don't know more about the actual physical stuff, and it might be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I totally agree. I think that in terms of what I can cut down on, or what I can leave in the packet, but sort of glaze over a bit, is sort of that earlier stuff. And then have more time in the bullet points to, like how Brooke was saying.
And more time for question and answers, because that's where we're really going to be able to help people.
Yep. I said 20 minutes wasn't going to be, like, they wanted to cut into it even farther. They wanted to give me 15. And I was like, no.
You gave it a good try.
All right, Fred.
Great presentation, great information. One thing you might include is the reason we are doing this is to promote given trees in the environment. So look at your forest, figure out which trees you actually want. Those are your quote crop trees or your save trees. And I've had very good luck, like just looking at this and saying, okay, we're really trying to create an oak forest that's spaced 20 feet here. So let's mark the trees we're saving first and then go in and let the landowners have a vision of what they're actually doing before they start. And then you say, look at your oak forest. It just happens to be surrounded by Douglas firs right now. So let's give you an oak forest.
Yeah, I thought about that. And then I also was just aware that it was going to be a long presentation already. And I said that I was going to do it on fire behavior and on fuels management, but it's super critical that people understand. And I only very briefly talked about it at all with that last slide. Like everything that you do is based off of what your goals are. So like, if you don't have that understanding, none of this information really helps you that much, because you still don't know where you're trying to get to. So
my experience has been very good sending the first crew in with flagging or paint to say, these are the crop trees. And it allows the landowner to be less scared when they're going in.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good feedback, because we will do follow-up meetings on site on the land with these people. So that's a real good idea for when we get to that stage.
Jason, I was gonna add a suggestion. Can you hear me?
I can hear.
Okay. Sorry, your face made it look like maybe it is.
No, sorry, I was just seeing that there's like a lot of chat.
Yeah, there's a
So-
lot of good comments in the chat. A lot of good suggestions on each of the pros and cons kind of sections of the presentation. And listening to Lynn talk about the early matter on just the basic fire science and chemistry, I think a way to reduce that and also keep it really relevant is to use a kind of like you did, just like a basic campfire, just like how do you, I think using that as a standpoint is really great. It's like you can't light it with a large log. Think about the bark that's protecting it, and how big it is. You need tinder, you need to arrange it a certain way, and just kind of hammering on that, what people already know, and just kind of making sense of that. And then it translates really well into the wildlands, I think. So that would be my little plug.
I'm gonna print out the fire triangle thing that I have and just have that available to keep pointing back to.
Yeah, super. Well, I hate to transition us. I guess as a closing, if you don't mind, Jason, sharing your slide deck or some form of it with us, I can share that with the group for folks who want to use it. And also this is recorded, so I'll make this available. We can look back on it anytime. I thought maybe we would have some time for the next item, but we're out, so I'll just save it for another time. If people are interested in it, I thought it would be nice for us to spend some meeting time going over the very short article about misinformation and the web table that goes with it, with some common myths and sort of like information that clarifies the myth. But folks can also do that on their own time. I have prepared just a really basic Google folder for that topic, and I just put it into the chat. So it has the original literature, and then it also has the web table put into a Google sheet. So we can go in and like add rows if you feel like there's something missing, like a really relevant local myth or concern that you're hearing from people that you want to comment on and just kind of raise awareness about. You can go ahead and add a row to the table, make a note that it's yours, and not the original authors. And I think we can keep building on this. And then next time when we meet, I will make time for us to go back to it and we can talk about what we're hearing out there in the field. Sound good? Okay. All right. If anyone has trouble with that link, let me know. I'd love to get your collaboration on it. Okay. Well, thanks everyone so much. This was super rich, really, really great meeting. I will be reaching out about other projects and whatnot. Thank you, Jason, for presenting. That was fabulous. Round of applause.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback. That's super helpful.
Yeah. Great.
Alrighty.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one.
Bye.
See you next month, all.
See you next.